Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luer, and I'm delighted to have a fellow sports entrepreneur here in Asia on the line today, Mr. Ravi Krishnan, calling in from Australia. Welcome, mate.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, great to have you, Ravi. And obviously, we've crossed paths many times over the last 20 years across Asia here, and of course, specifically in India, where you spend a very large chunk of your career. So, but let me just quickly give a little more background on yourself, and then we get into all your stories here. So, Ravi has been, I think, a keen sportsman in his early days, and then ended up with IMG in India in the mid-90s, helping set up a big office there, and on the back of it, doing a lot of amazing things. But now, I think over the last sort of 10 plus years, has become its own entrepreneur, and that's what the podcast is always about, the sports entrepreneurs here. And so we'll dig deep into that as well. But let's get into your stories here, Ravi. Like I said, you're currently calling from Australia. Where are you, in Melbourne or in Sydney?
No, I'm in Sydney.
In Sydney. All right, cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Beautiful city. And I understand you were celebrating your 18th birthday of your daughter there yesterday. So happy birthday from us here. I'm calling in from Bangkok. So this is going to be fun. Now, let's get in there. How did you get into the world of sports? I know you were playing it, and I think something happened, and then the path took a different direction there. Tell us.
Yeah, I had sort of aspirations as a sportsman, but injuries put pay to that, and then I went to law school, and it's actually funny when I was playing in the Australian Open Juniors in 1985. I read an article about Mark McCormack in the papers, right. And that sort of that I think that seeded the idea of potentially going into the world of sports marketing.
Right. And so you played junior tennis at the Australian Open. I mean, that's a pretty serious level already.
Yeah, I mean,
so you had some talent.
I guess I had a little bit, yeah. But I was never going to be a world beater, so probably destiny played a positive part for me. I read about Mark in the papers, and I guess that sowed a seed in my mind. And then after I finished law school, I went and worked for a big corporate law firm, and I realized that wasn't for me. And I had the aspirations to work for IMG, but I also had an aspiration to get out of Australia, not because I didn't like it. I love Australia, and it's very much one of my two homes. But I felt there was much more out in the world, so I wanted to work for IMG, and I did what everyone does, and sent an email to them or it was a fax in those days, to the London office, and got the sort of standard reply: "Nice CV, we'll keep it on file." And I sort of thought that was it. And then I quit my job, and then I just quit my job as a lawyer, and decided I was going to take off and travel around the world for a bit. And that was probably the best move I made. I did a bunch of odd jobs around the world. I was teaching English in Korea. I was tennis coaching at Club Med in Malaysia and Israel. And actually in Malaysia, I met a guy who was a guest there, and Rob Remnant. And we were talking, and he's like, what are you doing here? You're a lawyer. Why are you here? I said, look, I really want to work for this company, IMG. And it just turned out that he knew someone in London, and he sent a fax to that person and said, when this guy gets to London, because that was part of my ticket, you should meet him. And I got there 8 months later, and I'll cut a long story short. As part of that process, I met Andrew Wildblood and Bill Sinrich, and that ended up getting me a job. But the job was the junior most member of the setup team to go to India, which was never really part of my plan. Although I'm of Indian origin, I had never thought about working in India, but that was the only job they offered me, and I took it.
Yeah. Well, it was a smart move in hindsight. No? And the part which is interesting, I don't know how many guys now I've had on the podcast who had a law degree and are in sports. I don't know what it is with you lawyers, why you all think you should be in sports, to be honest. But anyway, well, that's maybe another story altogether.
Well, I think it's really, I think the origins of that is because Mark McCormack, who was really the founder and the father of the pioneer of the industry, he was a lawyer. I think there are a lot of lawyers that I guess he sort of employed or brought into the business, in those early days. And I guess that's why a lot of lawyers gravitated towards it. And at the end of the day, mate, you and I are sales guys at the end of the day, but it helps to have I think it does help to have a law degree.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, and it's interesting. I've heard it now so many times. So, it's definitely a pattern there, when people are listening here. Now then, so you got into India, as you said, you were a junior member of the team setting up the Indian office. We've had an office in India for many years as well, so I'm sure there's certain interesting parallels. And I'm sure at one point in time we were probably competing against each other in some sense.
Yeah.
But that's all fun, and that's where we should talk about now. So tell me, you had sort of two distinct parts with IMG, right? So I call it round one, round two here. So let's get into the round one part. Which really was about Sahara Cricket Cup, right? And you also set up a tennis tournament. Tell us a bit how the early days, so the mid '90s of sports marketing in India. How did it look, and what was the challenge and opportunities you guys were working on?
Look, I think India, as you know, opened up in '92 for liberalization, as they called it,
right?
And there was a rush to India at that point in time. From companies from all industries, to capitalize on the billion plus people.
Yep.
But I think it was early days. I mean, just because it opened up, it's taken a long time for it to change. Disposable incomes, etc., didn't go up overnight. So I think there's a bit of a gold rush mentality, but it took it's taken a long time for that to realize. But IMG got in there early. And I think it was an interesting time, but a challenging time. I mean, I think, cricket was and still is, by far and away the number one sport. And, as you know, IMG had been doing the television production, before we opened the office. And that was sort of the entree to getting in.
Right. That was TWI days, right?
Correct. And we secured the license for the ATP event. We bought a license from Nice and moved it to India. So that was another bedrock. And the idea was originally to have that tournament in Delhi. And I'll come back to that in a second. So between the television production, and having the ATP license, I think that gave the powers that be the impetus to set up an office there, and we set up the first office in Delhi. Right. And then it was pretty, and then in that process, they negotiated a deal with the Football Federation to set up the first league and the Hockey Federation, and so we just that was the reason for setting up the office. We landed there in October. I landed in October 1995, and I had no exposure to the industry. The other two guys in IMG, Dick Alford and Malcolm Thorpe, had some exposure. Malcolm came from the legal department in London, and Dick had been with the company for many years. And Peter Hutton, who was there as TWI, but for me, I was very green. And I remember our first meeting. We went down to watch the Bangalore test match, and we had our sort of first internal meeting, and there was about 8 of us, some people from London or whatever, and right. I was part of the sales team, which was just 2 of us, and literally we opened up magazines and newspapers and just started writing down company names, and then divided them up and said, "Go meet them." Yeah. That was it. It was as unscientific as that.
Yes, I know. Yeah, and I probably that's how we started too. We were a bit later than you guys, but for sure, I think the system is always the same, right? You just have to go in there. And in a market like India, like you rightly said, the opportunities are actually more than what you can do anyway, right? I mean, you literally look at every corner and there is something you could do, right, in the world of sports or in other business as well. And that's, I think, always the biggest challenge, right? You kind of get yourself a bit lost, with all these things there, and the question of where you spend your time and energy. So what was sort of the first big one? Was it the Sahara Cup, which was really sort of took off, or was it, which site was it?
Well, actually, one of the things that Bill Shunch, who was my boss back then, had negotiated, because he was heading TWI and we were doing the cricket television production. He'd negotiated for us to do the hospitality of the Cricket World Cup, which was in 1996.
Okay.
Mr. Bindra, who was then the president, Dalmia, had been to Wimbledon, I think a year before, and had seen the beautiful marquees and all the rest, and said, "We want to do this in the World Cup." So,
right.
So we took on the responsibility of that. So my first real project was selling hospitality to the Cricket World Cup in 1996, which was, at the time, I mean, I didn't really know much about it, but actually in hindsight, it was a great thing to do because, to do that, you had to meet all the companies because you were selling to corporates, and everyone wanted to talk because it was Cricket World Cup. So, sure. In that process, it's funny. And look, I was very young, and I was 27, and India still had that legacy of, hierarchy and, and experience. Unless you had grey hair, you weren't really treated seriously. But because we were doing cricket and because we were doing, and then other stuff, I had access to some very senior people, right. The who's who of of corporate India
Yes.
at a very young age. And many of those relationships I continue to have today and with the next generation. And I think that's something that, I didn't realize how important that was at the time. But, now I do, because, a lot of those people you can't access. I wouldn't be able to access now. India's evolved so much, and there are 5 or 10 layers, between them and, someone like me. But at that point in time, I managed to develop relationships with, like I said, the who's who of corporate India. And I think that stood me in good stead as I move forward.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And I've seen this in projects we've done where these things do open doors amazingly. And I've no doubt the Cricket World Cup in India at that time was as big as it would be now. Absolutely.
Correct. And on the back of that, because and that was really, doing the Cricket World Cup hospitality wasn't necessarily going to be a huge money maker, but the strategy was to do that and do that for the BCCI, and then on the back of that, we signed Bill signed the contract to do the Sahara Cup, which was really the Cricket World Cup was really a Trojan horse to do that deal.
Yep.
And that was a path breaker for many things. It revived India-Pakistan cricket after a 10-year hiatus. It was ICC sanctioned. It was in Toronto of all places, right? But gave us prime time in India. They did then, what was a massive TV deal, which now wouldn't be nothing. I think it was $20 million for 5 matches a year or something. It wasn't. It sounds nothing today, but it was big then. Yep. And that was really, and that TV deal was a catalyst for ESPN and Star to do their JV. I mean, ESPN won the rights; they bid against Star, and not long after that, they formed the JV because I think they decided they didn't want to, compete with each other, to just drive, rights prices up.
Right.
But for me, the defining moment was really being involved in that Sahara deal. That's something I worked on closely with Andrew, and that was my first taste of doing a big deal. And it wasn't easy selling. I mean, it wasn't easy selling cricket in Toronto. Everyone wanted to talk cricket, but there's a lot of naysayers. There's a lot of people that thought it was a crazy idea. Right. Now, cricket in offshore markets is what happens. But at that time, it was very path-breaking.
Absolutely.
But it was an incredible experience.
Yeah, for the uneducated here, I mean, India versus Pakistan. That's as big as, I don't know, any sporting competition or sporting rivalry I can think of. But share a bit more from your own experience. How big this really is.
Well, it's been described as war minus the shooting, and I think it really is an emotional thing. I mean, India-Pakistan is one of those great rivalries. Yep. Notwithstanding that, the player, you see the camaraderie between the players when you're there, but nevertheless, the vitriol that you get for losing one of those clashes from your fellow countrymen is pretty severe. So it's serious. But I've got to tell you, I grew up in Australia, so I spent the first 27 years of my life in Australia. So for me, the big rivalry was the Ashes, right? I mean, that's what I grew up with, notwithstanding that I was Indian origin. Yeah. But it's funny. Even when we did the deal, and obviously it was a big deal, and that showed how important it was. But the matches were in Toronto, and I went there and spent 2 weeks in Toronto. And when I got back to India, it was unreal how many people were talking about it. And then I realized what a big thing we'd done. I knew we were doing something big, but it's only when I got back from Toronto, and everyone was talking about it, that I realized what a path-breaking effort that was. Yeah, right. It was amazing. And I think it gave people what they wanted. And that's that's something that'll stay with me forever. It really was one of those just incredible experiences.
I can imagine. Now let's talk a little bit about the ATP Tour event, which you set up. Again, a groundbreaking thing, and obviously being a player yourself in tennis, that must have been something special too. Tell us a bit more about that.
It was, but what had happened was we'd bought the license, and the plan was to run it in Delhi, and then at that time, so the plan was run in Delhi. The first one was in 1996 in April, what happened, and we had done a deal with ITC, so it was going to be the Golf Lake Open. Right. And a few months before we and at that time the whole tobacco regulation thing was starting to rear its head. Right. And a few months before the event, ITC had come to us and said, "Look, we just can't do it in Delhi. We're self-regulating and we can't do it in Delhi. We're committed to doing it, but we'll start next year, and you got to find another location." So there we were, with a And with a massive tournament, a few months away, I mean, the chances of getting, and ITC were paying incredible money at that point in time for the title sponsorship. They'd done a 5-year deal. The ability to replace them, at short notice, was virtually impossible. So, we actually did. We actually got McDowell, which is a UB company, had come on already as an associate sponsor, and we just sort of, we did a deal with them to bump them up the title, but it was a fraction of what ITC were paying. And then we sort of ran that, and that didn't really, and then there wasn't a lot of money put behind the marketing. So, we ran the event, but frankly, it wasn't a huge success. It was,
where was the first event? Where did you host it?
In Delhi.
Oh, you still hosted it in Delhi.
So we had, we couldn't move from Delhi at short notice, and we had no ability to move it. I mean, there wasn't a lot of facilities in India. We just couldn't move it. So we actually just had to, swallow the pill, run the event, run it at a massive loss. And hardly any people came. It was April in Delhi, and there was not a promotion. So we did it, and then and then we had to go on to a mission to try and find another venue for it. And there's not a lot of great tennis stadium in India back then. So, but luckily we found. The SAF Games had been in Chennai, I think in 1992, and there was a tennis stadium there. And we went out, and we had, cut a long story short, we went to Chennai and did a deal with them to host a tournament, and we moved the tournament to Chennai. And from then on, it was a huge success. And I went to the tournament. So it's had 3 homes: Delhi first 1 year, Chennai for 20 plus years, and now it's in Pune. And actually, this year I went to the Pune event for the first time in ages, just to catch up with some friends. And coincidentally, the supervisor who was there this year was the same supervisor who was there in 1996, and Thomas Karlberg. And we were reminiscing about what a disaster 96 was and how far it had come. And it was a great memory for me. I've got to tell you, we were very under resourced. I was in sales ostensibly, but
you were doing everything.
We did mate, I was in the bottom of the stadium. There was no air conditioning, handing out shoes to the ball boys, and I actually the seats weren't numbered in the stadium. I actually went in the hot sun, and I with a bunch of kids numbered every seat. So
that's what you do, right?
I definitely feel like I cut my teeth. It wasn't just all hospitality and swanning around. I mean, literally every aspect of that event, I was involved in some way, and I think that gives you a real grounding in running events. And that stood me in good stead as I moved.
I have some flashbacks. I have some flashbacks on these moments too when we run certain events, and that's what you do, right? You have no choice. It doesn't matter what title you are, or whether you're the CEO or God knows what. You got to roll up your sleeve and do it. And so that's the fun part. Now, then you obviously you left IMG for a bit, and you went sort of into the financial world, and also spent some time. And so that was sort of, I think, around the time when the IPL started, or also was sort of created.
2006 to 2008, I was doing some private equity, but I was still on the board of IMG and still very much overseeing the tennis and overseeing Fashion Week. And Fashion Week had actually happened. That was one of another big thing that I was involved, which would happen in 2000. But also I was still very much involved, but not full time and not as managing director in that sort of short window. Yeah.
Right. So let's talk a bit about IPL. I mean, the whole that by now the whole world has kind of worked out. It's massive. It's a beautiful. It was an incredible idea. It was outrageous to get started and how it was started. But so tell us a little bit about the inside stories of it. Which maybe haven't been told yet.
Well, look, I think the first thing I'd say is back in '96, we were talking to Lalit and ESPN about doing a city-based league. That Lalit Modi, and that was but the concept then was not obviously 2020. No one had done that. It was around 50 over cricket. No. There's a whole lot of planning that had gone into that, but it never got off the ground. So I think the idea of creating sort of city-based, franchise-based cricket had been something that people have been talking about it for a while. But I think really the catalyst was the advent of 2020 cricket, and I think really I think it was just fortuitous that India won the World Cup in South Africa, which really gave it some great momentum. But I think there really, in my mind, there was a whole lot of people involved, but in my mind, there were really 2 people who were the engine room of sort of getting it going, and that was Lalit and Andrew. They were very much Andrew Wildblood, my boss. I mean, Lalit was really the visionary and the maverick, and the rest had all the big vision, and it needed a big vision, and it needed that sort of focus, that sort of sort of unrelenting focus, but Andrew and the IMG team were critical in making it happen, in executing that vision. I know, and Andrew's been, there's a lot of stuff that went into it. There was a lot of case studies done on various leagues around the world, and there was a lot of conversations with professors who were experienced in sport. I know Andrew spoke to a lot of different people in sort of coming up with with the right concept, and there's a lot of research and detail that went into it. But IMG was very, very much part of that whole process in putting Lala's vision into practice. And I think, as I said, that India winning the 2007 World Cup, 2020 World Cup, was, I think, a real catalyst for the nation accepting the juggernaut that was 2020 cricket. And ironically, India was, I think, the one country that voted against having a 2020 World Cup. But once it happened, winning against Pakistan in the final, I think, was just a huge stroke of fortune.
Yeah. No, and I think I've had a couple of those conversations with others. It's sometimes sports or any industry needs those kind of pivoting moments, right? Where things which before was maybe a good idea, but it now becomes clear this is something can really work, and clearly that's what it sounds like. And I'll want to talk a bit more later on, how this concept of franchises, was which fairly new to India at that time, right? It exists in the US and some parts of the world, but really not in that same fashion really in India. And now you have everything from kabaddi to other sports. But let's stick to IPL for a minute before we go there. So you spent some time, I think, with one of the clubs as well, right? One of the franchises. Now, before we get into the story there with Sharon Wayne, I want to talk about the crazy bidding which went on to actually acquire this, right? Which was obviously and I have to sort of do these numbers a bit on the top of my head, but I remember one of the teams or a couple of teams went over $100 million for the franchise fees, right?
Correct.
I mean, just and this is still India, right? I mean, 100 million is a lot of money in most parts of the world, but that's crazy money in India, even at that time, right? How did that all happen? A little bit of sort of background on that stuff.
Well, look, I think again you got to give a lot of credit to Lala and the BCCI for recognizing the value. That's really important. You can undersell something like that pretty easily, and I think yes. But I think the real catalyst was the deal with Sony, that $1 billion television deal.
Right.
That was done first. And if you can do that and you go to potential franchisees, then you've got something underpin it. Ultimately, the economic model was to distribute revenues amongst the franchises and to have that TV deal, right. that allowed them to put the floor prices and, and then, bring some of the key business houses to the table. I mean, I think there were only about 11 envelopes that were submitted on the day that they were open for the franchises. It wasn't like there was a whole bunch of people coming in. There was only 11. There was only 8 going. So but I think they got the right people at the table. And they got an incredible amount of revenue. And I think also, whilst the absolute numbers for the franchise fees were high, the fact that they could pay them over 10 years, I think was very important because ultimately then there are ways to cash flow that, et cetera.
Correct.
And given the revenue coming in, I think it was a great foundation upon which to start.
Yeah, and you're right. I think you're right. I mean, the big Sony deal for $1 billion there, which similar was for 10 years, I believe. That obviously,
but they renegotiated after the second year. Made it went from 1 to 1.7. So it just showed. I mean, I think there was
a lot of. I mean, we all know, and you probably know more than I do, what happened behind the scene and some of the controversial things there. If you want to comment on it, please feel free.
Yeah, well, as I said, I don't. I mean, look, I think that the whole thing initially was there's a lot of wheeling and dealing, and I think that happens to an extent. When you've got a new property, I mean, sometimes it's very hard to predict everything, going forward. But I think after that first year, the powers that be realized that this thing had a tremendous amount of value. I mean, that first year, and the first, it was unbelievable. I think people were just. It wasn't like they were watching just their team. People were watching every match. There was just some anecdotal evidence. Things like room service in hotels was going through the roof because people weren't leaving their rooms, and people were just glued to it was a phenomenon. I mean, no one was watching soaps, Indian soaps, which are big, and no one's going to the movie theater. Everyone was just, it was the greatest reality show on television.
Yeah. No, obviously this is definitely during my time when I was watching it as well, and clearly someone who had to learn cricket, being German, but the appreciation of what the spectacle which was created, is
Yeah.
unbelievable for sure.
Yeah, it brought a lot of people. Brought a lot of people to the game. It had all the razzmatazz, like NBA or whatever. It had the Bollywood stars, some of them owning teams. Everyone wanted to be seen at the games. Everyone wanted to be seen on TV. So it just families. It just the women viewership went through the roof. So I think at the end of the day, it went away from just being a sort of a primary male demographic to something that people would find. It was sportainment at its best. But
Right.
one of the most important things was that it was sport, and I think it was critical that you had the best players in the world playing. That was really important. And I'll tell you what was really amazing in the first year, which never happened again, was having the Pakistani players playing. They all played, and they were playing on the same team as Indians. I mean, we had, as I was the vice chairman of the Rajasthan Royals, and we had
Right.
a couple of players, including Sohail Tanvir, who I think won the purple cap that year. And it's a shame. It's a shame that they haven't been playing since. That's a real loss, I think, to the IPL.
Really, I have to admit, I didn't realize that. So the I know they have their own version of it, but I didn't realize they're not playing at all in the IPL anymore.
Yeah, they weren't. Since then, they haven't been given visas to play. So
Right. Okay.
the only we had it was the first year. Yeah,
Interesting. Now
they may have played. They may have played the second year because it was in South Africa. I can't. Maybe they played the second year, but since then they haven't. They haven't played again in India.
Right. Well, this year, now they're going to be playing in the Middle East, right? In the UAE, from the last I've read. What's your thought on that? Again, I know it's because of the virus, and probably it's potentially a safer place to operate from. But what's your thought on watching it now from the distance? 10 years later.
Well, they played part of it in the UAE once before because of the Indian elections. So they played. I think they split the season once. Look. I think in this environment, I think the show must go on. If it goes on in a different form and it has to move, then I think that's just a cost of what is a very uncertain time. It's better than it not happening. I think it puts a lot of money into the game. Ultimately it's jobs for the players. It's entertainment for the population. I mean, I think people need some good news and some distraction from what is a very serious and challenging time. So I think it's great that it's happening.
Yeah, same here. And I've been really vocal about moving things around and bringing it into locations where you can play safely. And it sounds like UAE has done a great job on the virus. It's probably an easier place to monitor, control things than if you would hold this across India. The same way, I couldn't believe that the French Football League just shut down and didn't give it a shot to try to play somewhere, right? And so, luckily Bundesliga and Premier League and others obviously continue to play on there. But so I think it's good. Now, obviously, there was a bit of controversy as well with the Cricket World Cup, which is supposed to be happening in your neighborhood there, right, in Australia this year. Yeah. And they had to move first before, I guess, the Premier League could move in there. So, what's your thought on that?
Well, look, I mean, I just think Australia's taken and it's increasingly so, a very focused view on how they're going to deal with COVID-19. And effectively close the borders. Not only the borders to Australia, but there are state borders closing also between states. Right. And right now, Victoria, which is and Melbourne, which is sort of sporting capital of Australia, is the worst affected state, and there's no sport going on there. In fact, you're talking about moving. I mean, the AFL, which is on right now, have moved 10 Victorian teams, and they're all got hubs in other states, and the show's going on. But I mean, it's sort of hard to believe that there's no sport, in the sporting capital of Australia. I mean, you are looking ahead. There's probably going to be no Boxing Day test. There's probably going to be no Australian Open. The grand final for AFL is not going to be played in Victoria for, I think, the first time ever. So, the reality is, the virus has, really, it really hit a lot of sports hard. But I think, one of the sporting bodies was saying, we've been through a severe reduce phase, reducing salaries and reducing OPEX and reducing staff. But at some point, we've got to move to the recover stage. And if that means, compromise, well, that's the only way. I mean, and at the end of the day, all these leagues are having, diminished crowds because they're not allowed to pack stadiums. But the reality is most people consume live sport on screens. So, I think, maybe there's an issue with atmosphere or whatever. But for me, as a sports lover, I love the fact the AFL's on. If there are less people in the stadium, whatever, so be it. But I get to watch my team every week, and it's it's something that we all missed. People have missed live sport, live entertainment. And I think it's such a part of our lives that we have to try and make it work somehow.
I want to pick up on what you just said. So you think the Australian Open tennis will not happen?
Well, I said, look, it's just,
no,
it's just
it's your opinion.
It was more of amusing, but I think it's in Victoria right now. They've just done stage 4 quarantine, so a stage 3 4 weeks ago. They've done stage 4. The cases have been rising. That's till the middle of September. I don't know whether the need for people to quarantine for 2 weeks when they go to Victoria is I think not going to change for a while. So, look, I guess never say never. As the first Grand Slam of the year, it's possible because, it's the off season is December. I guess players could go there and spend a couple of weeks in quarantine and train down there and then play the events running up. But, so, I wouldn't say 100% it's not going to happen. But right now, given what's happening in Victoria, it's the worst place in Australia right now for Corona. So, the chances, there's certainly a chance it won't happen, but I think if it was in the sort of middle of the season, I think it'd be much harder. The fact that it's at the start of the year, maybe they can find a way. But like I said, I don't think anyone's. And the thing is, you've got hundreds of players coming down, right? So they all have to quarantine. Right. So it's not like taking a team. You take the Indian cricket team if they're going to play there. Let's talk about that. It's 15, 20 people plus staff. They all quarantine in the same place. You can create a bubble, as they're doing with NBA or as they're doing with various other team sports. But I think it's difficult for an individual sport.
I think bubble is going to be the word of the year here this year, besides coronavirus, of course. I had a really interesting discussion with Stacey Ellister, who's the CEO of the USTA and US Open, right? So she was on the podcast a few weeks ago. As you know, the US Open is going ahead. Well, at least last we spoke about it. And the same thing, it's a huge challenge because it is a global event and the players are really coming in from all over the world. But let's get back to
you've already got players actually saying they're not going, right? So Rafa's pulled out, and you've got Ash Barty's pulled out, and I think individual players will make decisions. So
absolutely,
it may happen, but you're definitely going to have a depleted field.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think everyone has to pick their own choices, right? But before we go on to your own business, I want to talk a little bit franchise model in India, right? Because the IPL, as I said earlier, was really sort of the catalyst to take this concept of people buying a franchise the same way. As I said, in the US, it's very common, obviously, but Europe is very different, right? Europe, most of the leagues are open-ended leagues where you have a relegation, et cetera, system. Now, and again, you would know more than I do, but I think we got kabaddi, football, volleyball, motorsports, et cetera. There's a whole bunch of those similar concepts which have launched in India over the years, and some more successful than others, of course. Where do you think that this is? Is it just because the IPL worked so well and people have made money on it that it now works as a concept, or what was this? What is your view on it?
Look, you got to define the word works. I think the only league that's really making money is IPL.
Right.
At the end of the day, the other two leagues which have prominence, the ISL and kabaddi. Yeah. The one thing that let me step back. The IPL works because it's got a massive TV deal, yes. Right? That underpins it, right?
Right.
That puts revenue into the pockets of everyone, right? And then you've got this and the sponsorship deals on the back of that, right?
Right.
They come with they come after the TV deal. Although there's a big issue going on right now with their main sponsor. But
I saw that.
No other league, none, has even close to a comparable TV deal. You've got the two major leagues, kabaddi and whatever, are owned by a broadcaster.
Correct. So they're funding it in a different way, right?
Well, and that sort of diminishes your major revenue stream.
Correct.
So I don't know, I don't know where they go from a profitability point of view, because then you're relying on sponsorship, which isn't the same levels of IPL, yep. And ticket sales, which are very low for those sort of things. So and then you've got a whole bunch of other sort of secondary leagues, but none of those had that big line item, which is a TV income. But notwithstanding that, the reality is that and we all know this, that at the end of the day, owning a team is both business and can be vanity. And there's a lot of people that can't own an IPL team, but can own something at a
Correct.
fraction of the cost. So the motivations for some people, I guess, are pure business, and other are hybrid. So I think it's great for it's great for other sports that they're getting some prominence. It's great for the athletes. I mean, think about the kabaddi guys who all come from villages where we're making no money and now are making a living from playing that sport. I think that's fantastic.
Correct.
And
Yeah,
footballers,
that's a sport really is. I still don't understand really. I've watched it so many times, and people try to explain it to me. It goes way over my head.
Yeah, you got to grow up with it. But I think but they've done a great job. And like you said, it's created jobs, so that's fantastic. But I think especially in this environment, the broadcast and media income is virtually is paltry for those sports. So the economics are very different to that of IPL.
Right. And where do you see this? And here, let's talk that for a minute. I'm again very vocal on that. I believe TV rights will change dramatically over the next few years. The sort of pay TV model in many countries in the world is broken. Not sure India where it sits there exactly, but I don't believe that rights fees will just continue to grow just because someone will throw more money at it, and you keep playing the arbitrage game, which IMG, TSA, and others have played for 20 years now. What's your view on that?
Yeah, look, I think you're right. I think at the end of the day, you just can't keep going up and up and up. We saw that, back in the days of ISL and the Olympic rights and things like that. I mean, it just can't be a continued rising tide. So at some point, what you spend, you've got to make. And I think, what's happening now is, I think, going to be another factor. I mean, I think who would have thought that, live sport would just stop, right? I think, it'd be interesting for the guys who got the ASC rights going forward. I think, I think that, but I do think one thing, I think that ultimately, people buy rights or buy sponsorship, to get to the fans. They want to sell product, or they want to sell service, or they want to sell subscriptions, or whatever. And I think knowing your fan, the data play with respect to fans, that's going to be critical going forward. I mean, fans will still gravitate towards, watching live sport and live entertainment on whatever screen they watch it on. But I think the key now is to really know and understand the fans. And I think, the internet, gives a real opportunity to engage fans, not just in peak periods, but in non-peak periods, which has really been the holy grail for all of us. I've been involved in events my whole life, and you sit there running an ATP event. It's for 1 week of the year, and you're thinking 51 weeks of the year. How do I make more money out of this? How do I engage the fan more? How do I extrapolate this so the sponsors see better value, et cetera, et cetera? That's because you have these assets for 52 weeks of the year. So if you can create more top line, that can go to your bottom line. But I think, the notion that, media rights will just continue to, or TV rights will continue to go up. I think you're right. I think that's not going to happen, especially because the market's more fragmented. I mean, you don't have to watch live sport on, only on TV now. And I think that's going to change the dynamics, fairly rapidly.
Definitely. Yeah, and I mean, Hotstar is obviously becoming a big platform in India now. And again, but it's their monetization model, I have to admit. You think they're heading in the right direction there?
Look, I think when you're a market maker, it takes time. I think ultimately people will vote with their feet or their eyes or whatever. I think it's early days, but if you get the big rights, then I think you've got a chance, because people want to watch those those big properties. But it is about content, right? At the end of the day. So and in some ways, I guess you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. But I think if you look at the next generations, they're not slaves to TV. It's funny, my daughter who's 18, just never watches TV, right?
It's all on the phone.
We were watching TV the other day, and she was just saying how much she hates ads. I mean, they're not used to ads. They don't live in a world of ads, right? And it was just like, it was alien to her, and it was sort of really interesting for me to hear that, because the way that she consumes content is very, very different.
Correct. Absolutely. Now, before we move on, last question here I have for you: football. The world's game, and of course, India has an ISL as well as has various other football structures there. But it hasn't really cracked it yet, right? I mean, as much as I've watched some of the games since it started there, but it hasn't quite taken off, like you said earlier, right? It's really not as been commercially successful as the IPL. Where do you see the future of football in India?
Well, firstly, I think comparing anything to the IPL is a little unfair. It's like two different planets almost. So I think you have to sort of put everything else into different buckets, because cricket
Right.
holds a place in India that is unlike most sports anywhere in the world. So I think that's what I'd say first. But nevertheless, I think, look, it is the world's game, and a lot of the younger people love football. But the trouble is, and I have to say this: the quality of the football is not comparable to the quality of the football, and not even closely comparable to the quality of the football that the football lovers can see on TV every day, but
Right.
whether it be EPL or Bundesliga or Serie A or whatever. So,
Right.
I think at the end of the day, sport has to be compelling, right? I mean, IPL is if IPL was retired players or secondary players or whatever, it wouldn't be what it is today, right? IPL is because you've got the best players in the world playing new play, and people, you can't kid people. They want to watch competitive, tough sport, and I don't, and this is a little bit of my concern, because the quality of Indian football, compared to forget about the big leagues, even some of the smaller leagues, is just it's not there yet. So it's going to take time. I mean, I think there are people going to watch the games, etc. But the value of the rights, etc. It's going to take time for those to grow. I think Stars, Star and Reliance, I think, are playing the long game, and it's going to be a long game.
Yeah.
And I think I mean, but it's hard to say how long it's going to take. I think it's going to take a very, very long time. I think with currently what's going on in the world, that's going to make it take even longer. I think it's but both organisations now that involve Star and Reliance have deep pockets and a vision. So I don't think it's going anywhere. But I think in terms of it becomes sort of commercially viable and paddle its own canoe, I think that's going to take time. And then I go back to my other point. When you've got a broadcaster as a stakeholder, then you sort of kill your commercial market in some ways.
That's right. No, and I totally agree. And the part which is interesting, because I've had, I don't know how many times people approach me to help them on, their next sort of franchise model for whatever sport in India. And it's exactly the point I bring up. I say, look, the reason why the IPL worked is because you had the world's best players. So if you can do this with another sport, where you're saying, hey, let's do this whole thing in franchise in India, and you bring the world best players, then I think you're talking about the same thing. But if you're dealing with an Indian concept, as it's a nice Indian league, whether it's in kabaddi, volleyball, tennis, or whatever, I think even our buddy here, who did the global tennis series, what was it called again?
IPTL.
Yeah, correct, right? I mean, again, it obviously came out of the same model, right? It was a franchise model. It was, events around the world, and for a couple of years, it was an interesting one to watch. Somehow, it obviously, again, it didn't quite have the firepower. In this case, he actually took the global players right to it. I mean,
but I think the issue with that is, firstly, the thing about tennis is, you can see the best players on TV almost every week of the year, right? I mean, there's 2 or 3 tournaments a week, and there's so that I mean, it's great that you had the best players, and it was an interesting format. But again, no TV rights, or no TV rights to speak of. That and when you're paying the players top dollar, and they were paying top dollar, that revenue has come from somewhere, right? And without the TV, and the thing is, the TV rights, and the distribution and the exposure, can catalyze as a sponsorship. So, it's a chicken and egg, and then having the best players is what can help do that. But in cricket, having the best players help with the TV rights, all the rest of it. In IBTL, it didn't make such a difference because, like I said, there's so much tennis content, right, and official content. There's the Grand Slams and Davis Cup, and then then there's ATP tournament, 67 or whatever ATP tournament. So there's a lot of content. So just having the best players, and whilst the format was unique and entertaining, wasn't enough to catalyze the sort of rights that they needed to make it sustainable.
Right. Yeah, and I completely agree. We had a couple of conversations with Mahesh and others who are running it, and some of the the idea of what revenue streams or the opportunity or what someone would be paying for it, it was really, really beyond what I could see anyone would be paying for it. And I think that is where you said it was an expensive event, of course. Yes, there were franchise fees or certain fees being paid by the hosts to host the tournament and bring it there. But I think there was still the challenge was the cost versus the revenue on the other side, and that's where all these events, I guess, somewhat fall apart. Now let's move into your new world, and I think to some degree you've obviously what you're doing now is very different, right? And I'd love to hear a bit about it, because I think you're not running sort of events in a traditional sense. So What is Stepathlon all about, and what was the vision you had when you first started this?
Yeah, so when I left IMG, I was looking for something to sink my teeth into, and I'd seen this concept in another form which came out of Australia, and I thought it was really interesting because, we call it a race around the virtual world, and it started off as a B2B business, so around 10,000 steps, and companies were my clients, and they put their employees in. It's all about getting people moving and getting them healthy, but we call it anyone, anywhere, anytime. It allows you to do your activity wherever you are, whoever you are. It's not prescriptive. You can walk, you can run, you can play sport, you can do gym, but you get credited for your movement. It goes into the website, and your team moves on the virtual race course. And we started off as a pure B2B proposition.
Okay.
And so when I saw the concept, I like it for a couple of reasons. One, for me, it was mass participation, but in a virtual world, right? So therefore, it allowed companies to connect employees wherever they are. And that's a real challenge for companies that are geographically spread out. So It was huge for engagement. It was an event, so that's the world I come in. While it was a virtual event, it was an event. So for me that was something that I found appealing. But it didn't have a lot of the issues with that we have with events. There was no weather risk, there was no permission risk, there were no federations to deal with.
Right.
So we were so we could paddle our own canoe, and I like that as well. And then because it was B2B, I was selling to companies, and that's where and I was selling to companies at IMG, so I had access, right? So I thought for me it was very appealing, and and India was just at the beginning. We started in India, and that was just at the beginning of its fitness sort of revolution, if you like. So
and you position yourself as a wellness company, right? That's sort of
but it is wellness. It's wellness. We say now we bring a sports marketing approach to wellness, right? And I'll come back to that in a minute. And the B2B side has been successful. We've done 500,000 employees and 700 companies, but in these, it's what I realize over time is that it's hard to scale B2B wellness because companies never have enough budgets to put in all their employees. So they're always allocating a small amount, and it's for a percentage of them, et cetera. So it's hard to get that sort of hockey stick moment, right? But nevertheless, we've been going 8 years, and there's lots of interest in it, and and it does a lot of good, right? At the end of the day, I say it's a triple bottom line business. We can do good by doing good. It gets people healthy. It helps companies, and it's also a business. So, but we had a real seminal moment in 2019 where we took the same platform and used it for fan engagement. And going back to my point earlier, as you know, the holy grail, in our business is fan engagement. How do you engage the fan more? To monetize them more, especially in non-peak periods, because engagement drops off dramatically after the season or after the live match, etc. So even Wimbledon, 50 weeks of the year, no one talks about Wimbledon, but they have these assets for 50 weeks, and if you can create more top line, that goes straight to your bottom line, and that's the holy grail for all of us. So and the commonality between a fan, Marcus, is besides love of the team, love of the sport, love of the event, love of celebrities, everyone can be healthier, whether you're in Mumbai, Melbourne, or Manchester, right? It doesn't matter where you are. So that's a commonality between the fan. So we did a program
let me understand exactly how you track the movement. Is it someone has to just you wear a device, or you have to punch in your number of I ran 5K this day? No, how does it work?
No. So in the early days, we used to give devices, but a few years ago we changed it to a BYOD. So we sync with the APIs of Fitbit and Garmin and MyBand and a whole and various and Apple Health and whatever. So now it's BYOD. So that's easy. You can just sync your steps in. Right. If you do other activities like yoga or whatever, then there's a manual entry, and we convert it to steps. So the currency becomes step, which is a language that everyone understands around the world. So it's very easy, very simple. And the whole idea is to make it easy and make it simple. But the real key is the engagement and that sports marketing approach to wellness, which I'll come back to in a second. Right. But so last year we did a very successful program with Manchester City to engage their fans in India, and it was a real revelation because, like I said, the commonality between a fan, besides love of the team or love of the sport, is that everyone can be healthier. So it's a real common thread that you can leverage. But for us, I said the key is the activation and the engagement, and we do a lot of online and offline activation to get people, because getting people to start is easy. I mean, human beings with health and wellness are great at starting. We go on diets, but we go off diets. We buy gym memberships, we don't go. So that's where the engagement is critical, right? And that's why, and I say, we all know from the sports marketing world that sponsorship must be activated to get ROI, right? If you don't activate a sponsorship, it's a bit like buying a car and not putting petrol in it. It looks good in the driveway, but doesn't go anywhere. And wellness to me is the same thing, because if you don't activate and engage, then people do what people do, which is start and then stop, right? I mean, that's what human beings do.
Right.
So we've taken that, what we learned in sports marketing, and applied to wellness. So lots of activation, lots of engagement, lots of rewards and recognition, and that's what I think our B2B clients like. And that's what's working on the fan engagement side, because otherwise, there's so many digital health platforms or apps out there, but ultimately it's all about DIY, right? It's download the app and find your trainer and do this, and people do that for a while, but at the end of the day, unless there's some further motivation, it tends to peter out. And we do lots of rewards and recognition and experiences, and bringing all that stuff that we learned, like I said, in sports to fan engagement. And even to our B2B side. So it's been a real revelation. And, now we are, we're engaged with various stakeholders around the world, to use the platform for fan engagement. And what it also does is it delivers value to their commercial partners. And right now, we've never been more relevant. At the moment, like I said, every stakeholder, every rights holder, is having conversations with their commercial partners right now, right? But we can still get those commercial partners to the ultimate person to whom they want to get to, which is the fan. And the fan sitting at home or whatever, they're working from home, they're missing their live sport or whatever, but they still love their team or the event or the celebrity or whatever. So, for us, it's not just teams, it's any stakeholder that's in the sort of sports entertainment. In fact, right now we're doing one with a music festival out of Vancouver, which, it's a 4-day festival every summer, been cancelled, and now we're running a 100-day program focusing on millennials, and recreating that festival, through Stepathlon, but also juxtaposing that with a health and wellness message. And, nice. I say to people, Marcus, there's been no time in the history of the human race when more people from the human race have been thinking about health and fitness than right now. So, for us, this is a really, really interesting time, and we've got lots of conversations sort of all over the planet on how we can help, stakeholders engage their fans. You think about it, I mean, and everyone is renegotiating rights, so they're getting less money, and so here's a way of maybe bringing your commercial partners back to the table and building and keeping those relationships. And the third and really most significant part of it is the data play. We've got incredible data, rich, granular first party, or what they're calling zero party data now. Right. And that's going to be, and to me, you talk about value of rights, that's going to become critical in value in rights going forward. Yes. I think, how you know your fan, how you grow your fan, right. Not just, I mean, forget about the live, outside the live action. That's going to be critical, I think, in rights value, especially given what's happening now. So
you said you had about 500,000 people sign up, or you
for the B2B?
Yeah,
for the
registered.
B2B.
How many told people? Let's say, what's your universe right now of a database you already have?
So we've had 500,000 there, and we did a pilot last year with Man City, which was in India. We had about nearly 45,000 people sign up for that, which was a very small, but it was very significant because in India, and one of the reasons they did it was Man City didn't have a big fan base. Indians love the legacy clubs, the Uniteds, the Arsenal, the Liverpool. So it was, and very low recognition, etc. So it was a hugely, and we did a short version of it. It was a hugely successful. So now we're talking to stakeholders about growing it around the world, not just them, but many other stakeholders. And I think for us, one of the things that I find really exciting about this, Marcus, is, when you're talking to a company, even the biggest company has 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 employees. But when you're talking to a team or a celebrity or an event, there's millions of fans, right? Sure. So all of a sudden, the universe with which we're playing is much bigger. And that gives us the potential to scale. And then when you bring in the commercial partners they have, that gives you some muscle as well. So I think now we're in a good position to really create scale and create a really sizable, active community, which then not only can we monetize through the races, but also outside the races through the data that we have. So, there'll be not only can we have what I call sort of event-based income, but we can create customer lifetime value through other sort of stuff that's happening, the subscription-based stuff and other freemium models, and working with third parties, working with other apps and other platforms that are relevant. So, I see us at a really interesting stage in the evolution of the business.
Yeah, and I like that. I mean, that's part of it. When we were getting into digital as well, is that once you're in the digital space, the connectivity to others through API and other things is just insane, right? And that's the fun part of it. And I'm sure that's what you see as well, right? And there's no limit to who you can be connecting with and then drive each other traffic or collaborate in other ways, right?
Yeah, and I think that's really important, and that's you don't have to build everything yourself. There are other people that do things better than you would do. You have to I think have a focus on doing relevant, alliances where where 1 + 1 = 11. Everyone has to get something out of it. But I think there's so much opportunity to do that. And I think that's what makes this whole space exciting. And ultimately, like I said, is getting to the end consumer. And there's lots of organizations we're already talking to that want to sort of potentially work with us because we have potentially access to a huge audience through popular culture. Sport and entertainment is popular culture, and that's something that people find attractive. It's escapism, it's entertainment, it's all those things, and people need and therefore getting the messages through and etc. It's much easier to do that in that environment.
I have two questions here. One is so are companies competing with each other? So is there a little bit of, this company ran more or had more points than the other? And so there's a little bit of, who gets on the leaderboard? You built that in as well? Or how does it work?
So when we started, we were doing just an annual multi-company race. So you were competing both within your company and against other companies. Right. We still do that, but on a much smaller scale. But we're really focusing on customized races now with the bigger companies. Okay. Our focus now is much larger companies and customizing it. Because, at the end of the day, if you do, at a certain time, it's not necessarily convenient for some companies others. So we decided to move towards customized races. Okay. And now we can run them at any time over different durations, look and feel, etc. So that's more of our focus. Yeah.
Right. Well, that sort of answered, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer already. The revenue model, right, or the business model for you. So you are basically charging a fee to the company you're running it for, or how's the revenue, the business model?
So on the B2B side, it's very much like mass participation. It's a per person fee, which the company either pays or they split it with the employee. Right. But on the B2C, on the fan engagement side, we work with we get a sort of fixed platform fee, and then we share in revenue that's generated around it. So it could be sponsorship, e-commerce, whatever. So there's a sort of a flat fee and then an upside, and that's very much because we provide a great environment for commercial partners, not just the main sponsors but others, to create activations and engagement. That's one of the great things about doing it in the virtual world. You can give each commercial partner their place in the sun. You can drive revenue and drive business for them, and it makes it very scalable and very appealing because they can get straight to the consumer, which is what they're sponsoring stuff for anyway, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, I mean, you've been doing this now for almost 8 years, so this is not you couldn't call it a startup anymore. Where do you see where is the finish line here, or where do you see your goal?
Well, look, I think, I said the first sort of 7 years were really focused on the B2B. And like I said, it was frankly just, a marginal break-even business for a long time. It was more of a passion project. But now I think we have a massive opportunity. So I see sort of, in two phases. There's sort of, pre-fan engagement and post. And the fan engagement for us is the huge opportunity because, like I said, all of a sudden you're potentially talking to millions of people, right? And working with the brands that want to get to those. So, from my point of view, like I said, I see ourselves as both a sports marketing business and a wellness business, or sports entertainment business and a wellness business, which is, juxtaposing those, I think is very appealing to potential, third parties who might be looking to invest in us down the line or even acquire us. Yeah. From a sports marketing point of view, and this, representing stuff is a bit of a revolving door. And if you can own IP and own something and then own the customer, I think that's going to have huge value going forward. So, we own the IP, we own the platform, we own the data, or we share the data with our clients. But I'm saying at the end of the day, I think that's going to give us, if we can get to the sort of scale that I think we can, then down the line, I see us being appealing, not just to organizations in our world, sports, media, entertainment, but also to the wellness industry. The wellness industry is a massive industry, and they're trying to. It's about getting the customers right. So I think the future for me is get this to scale, build an active community, not a notional community, because I think there's a lot of profitless volume in the digital world. And then look to exit or partially exit or bring in bigger investors who can help us scale. I think we're going to be very appealing to people in our world, but also, like I said, to the wellness industry at large.
Yeah, nice. I like it. And I have one thought for you already, and I'll connect you with these guys. They're called Iconic. I was just on a call with one of the advisors to them. You might have heard them already. They recently raised a fairly large chunk of money, 100 million. They're building what I would call the super app, right? So it really cuts across dozens of different things. But I don't believe they have anything close to what you're doing there in it. But to me, there is an audience. They work with influencers. They work with clubs. So I think there's some interesting synergies. So we'll put you in touch there. But while we're wrapping up here our conversation, which was fun and digging deep into the world a bit of Indian sports, a little bit about Aussie, Australia here, which is, your home really. Let's wrap it up with two or three last questions here. One is, if you look back at your career now, both, what you would call more corporate, working for IMG on your own here, what was the couple of quick lessons you would pass on to a younger entrepreneur or younger self?
Well, look, I think, I'll break that down. For my IMG career, look, I just think, like I said, for me, I think you've got to take educated risks. I said I am first and foremost and always will be a sales guy. So I think you've got to be able to face rejection. As a sales guy, you hear more no than you hear yes. I think if you as a sales guy, if you have 10 to 30 good days a year, you've had an amazing year. You know what I mean? You hear no most of the time. So I think you've got to be persistent. I think networking. People think networking is a dirty word, but I think it's critical. Building relationships. I think for me, the transition from IMG to Stepathlon, was made easier by the fact that the corporates with whom I built relationships at IMG were willing to back me, when I started Stepathlon, and I would have been able to get it going so fast had those companies not come on and give me a chance. So relationships, can be translated from one industry to another, and I think that's really, really important. So, I think and I think look, I think the world's very different now. To me, it was still a fairly linear world when I entered the sports and entertainment world. I think it's becoming a more non-linear world. But for me, it was the ability to I said, had I not quit my job as a lawyer and jumped on a plane and traveled around the world and whatever, I'd probably be sitting here now. So you've got to and people, you've got to it was really chasing a passion. I was lucky. I feel very grateful. Grateful for that. But I think but you have to, like I said, you have to be prepared. Everyone says fail, but you have to be prepared to go up that steep hill. It's not easy. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, especially in markets like India. It's not easy to just come in there and do business. As a Western company, it takes time because India is not a homogenous market. It's more of a continent than a country. But I think for me, it's been an incredible journey. I feel very lucky, Marcus, that I went to IMG in India. If I had gone to IMG in Australia, I would have been put in tennis or golf or in one division. I would have stayed there for 10 years. Right. Going to India, I had to do everything. I was involved in all divisions. I started Fashion Week. IMG didn't own a Fashion Week, didn't run a Fashion Week. At that point in time, we represented the commercial rights for New York. But I actually had coffee with Mark McCormack in Sydney last week, and he was saying, look, that was the first Fashion Week IMG ever did lock, stock and barrel. And I never would have been able to do that had I not been in India. So, it was great to be in one of those markets, which is effectively virgin territory,
Yep, the Wild East.
Yeah.
And like I said, I can concur with that. That's how we started India as well. It took a long road, and it's similar to China when we opened there. These markets, as big as they are and the opportunities are large, they're not easy to do for sure. So, and that leads me to my last question here, really. Look, you've been around the industry now for 25 years. We reminiscent in that. Where do you see the industry in the next 25? And whether it's India, a bit specifics, or in general, which the space you're in now. What do you see? What do you think is going to happen in the next 25 years?
Wow,
I know it's a tough question.
It's such an interesting. I think the next couple of years is going to be really interesting. I think given what's happening in the world, I think we're going to have a real shakeout. I'm not sure. I think a lot of the it's amazing, Marcus, what's happening in things like mass participation and whatever. You're just going to see a lot of companies disappear. That could lead to consolidation. It's possible that the big will get bigger. Although some of the big ones are struggling as we know right now. I think that the value, the way rights are bought and negotiated is going to change dramatically. So I think that rising tide is going to change. Look, Wimbledon's the only company that had pandemic insurance. And now everyone's going to be going for that, and there's going to be a lot more.
If you can buy it, no one's going to sell it anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, but the guys that are negotiating for sponsorship and whatever are going to have so many qualification clauses or whatever. So I think we're certainly in an uncertain period now, but. What's undeniable is that people love sport and people love entertainment, and and they want to watch that. I think that. So I think that's not going to change. But then the way people consume and view it, we already see fragmentation, right? And that's going to change. And people sitting, having 20 mates over and watching, on TV in your house is sort of gone. You're all watching on the same screen and, using social media to bet and play fantasy sport and whatever. So it's funny. It's a binding thing, live sport and live entertainment. But the way we consume now is somewhat isolating, which I find really weird.
Yes.
So but you look at things like the value of basketball franchises over the years and American sports and whatever. And I say at the end of the day, like I said, it's tribal. It's escapism. It's all those things. That's not going to change. So I believe it. It continues to have a prominent place in the lives of people.
I would agree.
I will say one other thing though. The other thing I think is you had we've been through this phase. I was talking to a federation. I won't say who, but a lot of federations were bringing stuff in house. They were staffing up and bringing stuff in house and firing the big agencies. And I think. Maybe that model changes now because they're going to have to keep their bottom. They're going to have to look at their bottom lines and their costs. And there may be opportunity for the intermediaries that had sort of that weren't around to get back to start working with these federations and stakeholders because they can't have the big staff and the big sales team and the big so that could be an opportunity as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur with that. I think that two things. One is in the short term, could be the next few years, we're going to see a lot of pain in our industry, no doubt, right? You rightly said, I think there will be things disappearing, whether it's clubs, leagues, or events, and agencies maybe with it, who will disappear. And then, of course, in the long run, I do believe sport it's not something which will go away. Yes, esports will take its slice of that entertainment part, no doubt, and it's going to get stronger. That doesn't mean that the number one sport in each market, whether it's cricket in India or, football in others, will disappear. So it'll be an interesting time when we come back at this here in a few years and look at what we were all doing and what we're doing at that time. But till then, Ravi, thank you very much for your time here. Enjoyed this.
Pleasure.
Enjoy your time with your daughter there in Sydney, and we'll catch up again soon somewhere on the planet.
Thanks, Marcus. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Talk to you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.